Hello and welcome back. So in the last lecture, we created an entity service in order to perform CRUD operation on the course entity. So if I go to VS Code, here we created this course entity service, which is extending entity collection service base. And there we have specified the type for the entity as course. And now using the instance of this service, I can call methods like getAll, update, add, etc. in order to perform CRUD operation. But the problem here is when we are using this method or any method which this course entity service is providing, by default, it is making an API call to root URL / API / courses. So NgRx Data is assuming that our API is hosted on the same domain from where our Angular application is running. And there, the endpoint for the API is the domain, in our case, this HTTP localhost 4200 / API and / the entity name. And it has also made that entity in plural. But that is not the case for us. Our data is present in Firebase database and we want to fetch data using Firebase API. So for that, what we need to do is we need to override the default behavior. Okay, the default behavior of this course entity service. And to do that, what we need to do is we need to create a data service. So if I go to the documentation, you will see here we have a link for entity data service. And by creating an entity data service, we can override the default behavior. We can specify the endpoint of the API from where the service has to fetch the data. So if I scroll down, we can see an example. So we are going to create a custom data service. For example, this hero data service, which is extending default data service. And there also we need to specify the type for the entity for which we are creating that default data service. And then we can write our custom logic for this getAll method, for this getById method, for this getWithQuery method, and other methods as well. And this is what we are going to do. So let's go back to VS Code. And now we are going to create another service. So inside this service folder, I'm going to create a new file. I'll call it as course-data.service.ts. Again here, let's go ahead and let's create and export a class. I'll call it as CourseDataService. And let's also decorate it with @injectable decorator. Okay. And here I'm not going to provide it from root. And this class, this data service class, it should extend from default data service as we saw in the documentation. So it should extend default data service and we need to import it from NgRx Data. So this is the first step. In the second step, again, we need to create a constructor, and from within this constructor, we need to call the constructor of this parent class. So for that, I can use the super keyword. And to this, we need to pass two things. First, we need to pass the name of the entity. In our case, the name of the entity is course. Let's specify that. And the second argument which we need to pass to this constructor is the HTTP client. Because using HTTP client, we are going to make an HTTP request. So here, I'm going to create a private property. I'll call it as HTTP, which is going to be of type HTTP client. We need to import it from Angular /common /HTTP. And here I'm going to use the inject method to inject an instance of HTTP client. All right, so let's pass this HTTP as the second argument. And then we also need to pass a third argument. So here we have an error and it says super must be called before accessing this. All right, so what we need to do is instead of injecting it here in this constructor, I'm going to create a private HTTP property of type HTTP client. And I will remove this line from here. Okay. And as the third argument, we need to pass an instance of HttpUrlGenerator. For that, let's also inject an instance of HttpUrlGenerator. which is going to be of type HTTP URL generator. Now let's pass this as the third argument. Now this HTTP URL generator, it is used to generate the specific HTTP URLs that the default data service use in order to interact with the backend. In our case, it should generate the URLs for our Firebase database, for our Firebase APIs. Okay. And here also we need to specify the entity type. In our case, the course entity is of type course. And to use it, we need to import it. And here we have some errors, and it says that this parameter property must have an override modifier because it overrides a member. Okay, so that means we just need to remove this private so that it can override these properties from the default data service. Okay, so all the issues are gone. Now what we need to do is, let's go to course component. So there we are trying to use this getAll method, and we need to override this getAll method in our data service. But before we do that, we also need to tell that whenever we are using this getAll method, it should use the getAll method from this CourseDataService. So for that, currently we are not providing this service from anywhere. Let's go ahead and let's provide it from AppModule. So let's go to appmodule.ts. In there, let's go to providers array, and there let's provide our course data service. Okay, then we also need to do some more configuration that I will show you in a bit. But before that, let's try to override the getAll method here. So here I'm going to create getAll method. So basically this is the method which we want to override, and it should return us an observable of course. Okay, here I'm going to remove this because using this argument you can specify any options which you want to have for HTTP request. I'm not going to anything here. Let me save the changes. And here what I'm going to do is I'll go to courseservice.ts, and there I have a method to get all courses. Here I have this method read courses, right? And this is also returning us an observable of courses. So I'm going to copy this logic. So the logic is going to be same, and I'm going to paste it inside this method. And let's format the document. Okay, now to use these environments, we also need to import it. So I'm going to import it. To use this map, we need to import it from RxJS. So let's import it, and all the errors are gone. So I'm not going to explain this logic again, or maybe I can do that. So what we are trying to do here is we are trying to make a GET request using this HTTP client to our Firebase database URL. Okay, so in the Firebase database, we have this courses collection. To that, we are making an API call. And for that, this will be the URL. So here we are passing the URL. This get method, it is going to return us the courses data. So we are waiting for that data using this pipe method. Once we have received that data, in that the courses data which we are going to receive, we are going to receive it as a key value pair, where the ID of the course will be the key, and then the rest of the course object will be the value. But in that course object, we will not have an ID property explicitly, and we want to use the key of that course as the ID. So for that, we are writing this logic, and then finally we are returning the courses. This courses is an array, as you can see. Initially, it is an empty array, and then using this for loop, we are creating course objects where we are also adding this ID property, and we are extracting all the existing properties from the course object, and then we are returning a new object. So in this new object, we will have all the properties like author, price, description of the course, title of the course, image of the course, etc. And we are adding an ID property which we are setting with the value of the key of the course. This I have already explained in the previous lectures, so I hope you understand this. And finally, we are returning this course array. And with this, if I save the changes and if we go to our application, it is still not going to work because there is one configuration which is missing. And if I go to network tab, you will see it is trying to make a request to courses. Let's see the URL here. And you will notice that the URL is still the root URL /API/courses. Now we have created our default service. Basically, we have created our course data service, but NgRx still does not know that it has to use this data service whenever we are making use of this getAll method. We have overridden it, but NgRx does not know about it. So again, let's go to AppModule.ts, and there inside the body of this class, we are going to create a constructor. Using this constructor, we are going to inject two instances. First, I am going to inject an instance of entity data service, which we created in our last lecture. So I will call it as entity data service. Okay, I want to create an instance of entity data service. This is the name of the instance, which is of type entity data service. And I'm also going to inject an instance of course data service. So I'll call it as course data service of type course data service. Okay, actually it should go inside the parenthesis. So it should go in here. All right. So we are asking Angular to inject an instance of entity data service. So if you remember, if I go to our services, we created this course entity service, which is extending this entity collection service space. So here, first we are injecting an instance of entity data service using which we are going to register our course data service. Okay, so here I can say entity data service dot register service. So here we are registering our course data service, and to this we are going to pass our course data service. And now NgRx will be aware about this course data service. And here actually the first argument should be the entity name for which we are creating this data service. So in this case, the entity name is course. With this, if we go to our application now, okay, I'll have to log in again. So let me log in first. Let's provide the password and let me log in the user. So I'm logged in. If I go to courses, you will see that now it is fetching all the courses from the backend and it is displaying here. And if I show you the URL to which the request has been made, so you see the request has been made to course.json. So the request has been made to this URL. So this is the URL of our Firebase. This is the API using which we are fetching data from our Firebase database. Okay, so this data service which we have created here, this getAll method which we have overridden here, it is going to return us all the courses by reading it from the backend database, and it is going to assign it. Basically, it is going to return us the list of courses and it is going to assign it to this courses variable, this courses property which we are creating here. And if I go to the HTML, what we are doing is on that courses. So here we have that courses property. So since it is going to receive an observable, we are using this async pipe to wait for the data to come. And once the data we have received, we are looping over it and we are displaying each course inside a course card. So you can see all the courses are rendered here. All right. So now I hope you understand how we can customize the entity service when we want to use a custom URL. Basically, when our API is not hosted on the same domain where our Angular application is running. This is all from this lecture. If you have any questions from this lecture, then feel free to ask it. Thank you for listening and have a great day.